want us to have, first of all, a little talk about Scripture before we move forward into sort of talking about what today's gospel might actually be about. You see, we often fight about what Scripture says. In our culture, in our church, we often get into disagreements because we understand it to be one thing and somebody else understands it to be something else, and then there's a book about this that says something else, and then there's a preacher on television who says it's about this, and then there's a guy over there in Italy who says it's about this, and so we've got all of these different things going on. So I will tell you, first of all, that as a pastor and as a preacher, what I preach, you can totally ignore. All right? Everybody raise your right hand? No. Scripture and the interpretation of Scripture and the preaching of Scripture is a very personal thing. And actually, I think today's gospel reading is interesting because the whole tale of Mary and Martha happens in a house, happens with Jesus there, and it happens because there is a dispute over what role people play in their own faith and in their own life. Right? We've got Mary and Martha at odds with each other over who should be serving the rice, who should be doing the dishes, who should be cleaning up, who should be washing the feet. Right? So let's think about, in the time and place that this story is happening, let's think about it a little bit in a certain way, and hopefully we can then extrapolate from that some ideas about what living in the 21st century is like for all of us. There's not a whole lot of details about this, but there are some things that we can assume about this particular gospel reading. And part of it is that we have other examples or other times when Jesus goes to Bethany and encounters Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus, who doesn't appear in today's gospel lesson. But today is interesting to me as a preacher because this is obviously Jesus' first visit in Bethany with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. He is not known to them at this point. He simply is a guest in their home for the first time. But we can assume, and we can extrapolate from what we know about Scripture, that Mary and Martha and Lazarus become very good friends with Jesus during his ministry. Right? No dissenters? Nobody disagreeing so far? All right. So what we have is the very beginning of this relationship. The very beginning. Jesus doesn't know Mary and Martha, and Mary and Martha only know Jesus by reputation. So what gives Mary the audacity, the sheer, just unbelievable temerity to ignore everything that she was created for, everything that she was raised for, everything that she lived for, to sit at Jesus' feet? How dare she? She was not even a real human being. She was a piece of property. She was there for a role in the running of that household. She had no husband. She was owned and run by her brother Lazarus. And this great teacher comes to her house. Now, I don't know about you, but if Jesus came to my house and I knew who he was, there's a whole lot of corners that would be cleaned up, and a whole lot of dishes that would be polished, and a whole lot of things would be done differently. I don't know about you, but if I knew that this preacher, known far and wide, was coming to my house, and everybody was very excited about the message that he was bringing, and everybody knew who he was, and everybody knew that he did miracles, forget Martha. Frank would be cleaning up. So we get this clear. Martha is status quo. Martha knows her place. Martha knows that there isn't anybody else who's going to cook the food, clean the dishes, wash the feet, take the plates, make sure that everything's done. And there is Mary, sitting at Jesus' feet, listening, learning, astounded by what she hears, because God is doing something completely new in Jesus Christ. She knows it. So Martha calls her out. Doesn't call Martha out, doesn't call Mary out directly, you notice, because Martha assumes something we all do, right? Martha assumes that Jesus is going to agree with her, right? Read that sentence again. Read that sentence again in the gospel. Martha's not going out on a limb here. Martha's not making assumptions about Mary's role. She's assuming what Jesus is going to support. And she calls Mary out. Tell her to do what she's supposed to do, like I'm doing. How many times have we heard that at a council meeting or a congregational meeting? How many times have we heard that on the streets around us? But Mary's response, whether she says the words or not, Mary's response is, my faith matters. My life matters. My desire for God matters. Mary wants to matter. We think that maybe Jesus would say, well, all disciples matter. That's not what Jesus says. Jesus knows what's in Mary's heart. And Jesus knows that Mary is taking a chance. And Jesus knows what women in his day and time have endured in the faith community. Jesus knows she's not even a second-class citizen. Jesus knows that she doesn't count to anybody else around her. But Jesus says, Mary matters. Mary's desire to hear the word matters. Mary's desire to break the bonds of where she is in her life as a woman matters. Mary's faith matters. You could argue that the whole story of Jesus is about all disciples matter. But today, in this reading from Luke, what we hear Jesus saying is that because of all the stuff going on in the world around them, because of the way women were treated and the way they suffered and struggled and the way they were devalued, at that moment, to fix that situation, Jesus says, Mary matters. And we know that this turned out really good for Mary. Right? Because Lazarus, unfortunately, dies. And Mary is the one. Mary is the one who meets Jesus on the road on his way to Bethany. And she pounds him on his chest. And she says, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Once again, for her to have the temerity, the sheer gall, to challenge a rabbi, a man in the open streets of Bethany, to tell him that he had done something wrong, should not have been tolerated. And yet once again, Jesus says to Mary, your feelings, your grief, your life, your faith, you, Mary, you matter. And Jesus weeps. Times change. Social situations change. Our understanding of relationships with people different from us change. The question is, are we willing to understand change? Are we willing to follow Jesus into that unknown territory of taking society's expectations, taking what the world has told us for 20, 50, 100 years, 1,000 years? Are we willing to confront that in our lives? Are we willing to say to someone who is suffering and struggling? Are we willing to say to a group of people who might have been burdened beyond expectation and beyond tolerance? Are we willing to say to them, you matter? Because God is saying it every day. God hung on the cross to say that we all matter. But Jesus, in his actions, took each individual circumstance into account. And by doing that, he said, you matter. You matter. Can we do any less as followers of Jesus Christ? Can we examine our hearts, examine our expectations, examine our own sin and our own participation in a system that is unfair and rigged? Can we dare look in the mirror and instead of seeing the same old, can we look in the mirror and see something new, something enlightened, something energetic, something that serves instead of wanting to be served? And we see even the Martha in the mirror. Can we see the one who is stuck in the mirror? Or can we wake up each day and in the mirror see the image of Christ? And in seeing the image of Christ, can we just step out of the world and not take it at face value, but work to change, work to inspire, work to challenge, work to love even more? Jesus said to Mary, you have chosen, right? You have chosen the best part. And for us as Christians, the best part of our lives are those times when we reflect Christ to our neighbor, to a stranger, practice radical hospitality.